Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin Ebi, and we'll be doing our presentation on magazines. My group project member is,
Brig Pfeiffer.
yep, and we're super excited to show you what we have. So, what are magazines? This is the actual definition that they have available on in the dictionary, is that it's a printed or digitally published collections of texts, which include essays, articles, stories, and poems that are often illustrated and produced at regular intervals. Magazines are also known as journals and or periodicals, typically if they're seen more in the academic sense. So some examples of magazines are here. We Magazines can be more of an entertainment or for beauty or for home. So these are some examples of the top magazine companies there, like Vogue and Time People, Reader's Digest, Bon Appetit, which is more of a food type magazine, Rolling Stone, which talks about music, National Geographic, which is about the environment, and Southern Living that has that home style. And then other thing is with the magazine layouts, they can follow different types of layouts. And this is just one of the examples with Vogue. That's more of a fashion luxury type magazine. So you can see there's photographs and headers and pictures and the text to show you what the story is about. And with there is the editorial type article layout, these layouts that we're showing, they're not really a tell all, like everything that a magazine has. They're more just examples, but this one is a little bit more of an academic type magazine, which is why it's called an editorial, and you can see the information there. And then magazines also have different ads in it, from different companies. So the ones that you see here are from Fiat, M&M, and then we have more of the entertainment CBS, and then pretty sure that one's okay, Adidas. I say Adidas. So, if you have any quarrels with that, fight me in the comments.
Instead of
But,
Adidas,
I know I say Adidas. It's kind of
honestly, I kind of like that
everyone's gonna
better.
share their opinion in the discussion post. So, but one of my favorites is actually in the middle there with Eminem.
All right, and so getting into the effectiveness of magazines. So one of the things that I didn't necessarily touch on in this specific one, it might be in the next, but advertisements, they're absolutely crucial to magazine success as a publication, like their staff being able to stay on staff, not having to fire people, and also just for the advertisers as well for the products um that they're giving that they're selling. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyways, so the effectiveness of magazines, one of the biggest kind of things that came from magazines, at least starting in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was magazines changed things from being kind of centralized to a specific regional location and change it to more of a national trend. And these national trends actually stemmed a lot of the times from magazines. So these included different things like fashion, news stories, different products like food, consumer goods, that it was the first time that we really had things widespread across the nation compared to how it was before, where it was just centralized to a certain region. So kind of like the different types of magazines that you were showing us earlier, some of those fall into these categories of like, hey, like all these fashion trends, it's not just in a certain area, it's going to be across the whole nation. So it was one of the really cool things that they were able to do. Um, and then so not only did just the advertisers benefit. So I talked about the advertisers a little bit, but the authors and poets benefited from it as well. So one of the cool things, I actually didn't know this until I did the reading. I didn't realize that, especially I think said around the 1940s, authors and poets were able to put their work into magazines. And them being able to do that just allowed them to reach a new audience and be able to put their work out there, um, for sometimes for free, sometimes paying. But it was just really good for them. And then the advertisers as well, it's important on both sides for the advertisers. They're able to advertise specifically to certain groups of people depending on the magazine and able to get sales based off of that. And in going further into that, it once COVID-19 hit, advertising changed completely. Um, it was rough, as I'm sure everybody knows, for many companies. Many companies had to lay off a bunch of their workers. Nobody could afford anything because nobody was out doing anything. And that did not stop with magazines and advertisers. So it wasn't even necessarily the magazines that were dropping workers, it was advertisers didn't have enough money to even pay to have their advertisements into magazines, which therefore led to magazines dropping. And so that's kind of the big concern here with magazines is in order to have that content to make with magazines, you also have to have the advertisers. So if you don't have one, you don't have the other. And I mean, I don't know if that necessarily is the case when you're looking at um, when you're looking at advertisers. Advertisers will always have a product, will always have a service too, but specifically magazines, advertisers didn't have the magazines and vice versa. And lots of times as well, that one of the other issues with it is that it's mostly always behind a paywall, especially if it's a physical copy. It's pretty much definitely going to be behind a paywall. Sometimes online ones won't, but and obviously they have to do that to make money. That's just the way it is. But people don't like that sometimes. They like their content for free, which I get it sometimes, but they also have to make money. So that's just one of the other big things with that. The relevancy. So as we can see now, one of the things for everyone else who's also read this chapter, it's really interesting actually, kind of learning about how as digital short form content has become more prevalent, magazines have actually had to change their strategy to match with that digital form content. So one of the things, at least it is now, but especially when magazines first became popular, was celebrity magazines. So that was following a day in the life of a celebrity or just, the paparazzi snapping photos of their affair, supposed affair, all that stuff. So that was kind of the biggest thing back in American culture when magazines first started. But one of the things that they've had to kind of tailor towards is now different magazines have to focus on different types of readers. So you have to know your audience. So for example, you look at a sports magazine and you're not going to want to put, I don't know, if your target audience primarily 18 to 35-year-old males, you're not going to want to put like feminine products like in your advertisements for that, right? So they have to tailor to that with their advertisements, but also with their content that they're putting in there too. They're not going to want random stories about farm animals. And so on top of that, they've had to also change to instead of being on broad topics, they've had to narrow it down to really niche, however people say it. I never know which way to say it. Either way, people say I'm wrong. So we're gonna go niche, okay? So they have to focus in because then they're able to find their audience and still be able to have an audience pretty much. And so that's one of the ways that it's had to change. And in some ways that is for the better, being able to know your audience more, but it also sucks that the digital content is just kind of taking over from the physical magazines. And one of the things now, so for me personally, usefulness of magazines in my life, I would say like growing up, I read magazines a whole lot more than I do now. Um, it's just I don't know what it is. It's just been really hard as I've gotten older to really get into them because now I just see them at the Walmart checkout stand and it's just a bunch of gossip stuff that I'm like I don't even think this is real. But when I was growing up, this magazine that's on the screen here, the Sports Illustrated Kids, was my favorite magazine ever. Um, and it's more of a nostalgia thing for me because on here, when you open it up, there'd be sports cards in them that you could like cut out or you could like rip out, and they're my favorite things ever. And in first grade, no, second grade, one of my friends would always bring it in. He'd always give me the sports cards and let me read it. And so that's one of the things that I think is really cool about magazines. You can go back and you can look at these like this one is super awesome. This opportunity for these two kids to be featured on the cover of a magazine, and they'll have that forever. But that's the issue is that I think now I just don't read them as much. I replace it with electronic sites because electronic sites are quicker, easier. I don't have to wait for it to come in the mail. I can get it right now and I can read however much or as little. I mean, I can do that either with a magazine, but and most of the time it's free. You go on to Twitter or X or whatever, you go on to Instagram, you can go on to Facebook, just any of that stuff. You can find stuff like that or even on news sites now. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I still think they're awesome. I still think they're good to have around, but I just don't read them as much as I used to.
For me, my personal usefulness of magazines is that I think I have a little bit more of like the traditional what you would think of when somebody is like, oh, she's reading magazines and stuff. So like I'll usually you see a magazine like at the hair salon or if I'm waiting for a nail appointment, I'll see that table of all the different magazines and I'm like, okay, this one looks interesting. I'll pick it up. And then I go through it there. Another thing that I use magazines for is for school assignments. That's probably one of the most common now, just because that's the thing that we're studying in terms of like advertising or public relations and everything like that. So I feel like that my use of actual magazines is pretty low. I would say around once every other week is also kind of generous. Just because, typically I don't get my hair done or go to the nail too often. That kind of once every other week is coming from the school assignments. And it's super interesting too, because the person that I go to get my hair done, she has a lot of the hairstyles type magazines. So you actually kind of use all of the different designs for hair on it to let her know the inspiration behind what kind of cut that you want. So I see people using it in their profession and something like that. But for me, like my what I consider like magazine importance is pretty low. When I'm looking through all the content, it's not really much of, I'm not really absorbing it because I'm flipping through it pretty fast just to like pass time. Even though like I try to be super cool and try to read the articles, I'm not really taking it in or anything. Not as much as I do with social media, because I feel like with the newer generations, like the younger that it gets, is that our attention span is a little bit low. So we need something a little bit more engagement, more movement, maybe some audio along with just visual. So I feel like how magazines are changing is that they need to adjust to that type of attention grab that they used to back in the what some people call the good old days.
Or
But
the olden
so
days.
the golden days, yeah. So, with the future of magazines, we wanted to introduce a little bit more of a timeline so you can see how much magazines have grown. This timeline goes until 1800s. There might be different versions of it before that, but we'll go with a little bit more of what you traditionally see in the 1800s. The magazines were kind of used as publications for literary sharing, discussion of social and political issues, and shaping public opinion. With that transition from regional to national, it was spreading a lot of those mass messages onto people. And so people were like finding out things that were happening at different cities and finding out about all these people. So it also is like introducing the idea of celebrities rather than just like royalty and nobles that you would hear of. So on this top right is an example of an actual magazine. It's the Century Illustrated monthly magazine. You can see that they release that monthly and it has more of a like animated style, not like the photography stuff that you see now. And then when we're moving into the 1900s, there was this boom of magazines because people were really interested in it, and the huge market for it was towards women. So a lot of the magazines were about like housekeeping and beauty, something like with entertainment and home, and still spreading that political idea that women could share to their husbands or their family. So it has like that message that's being said. And there was a little bit more different interests around it. So with the other graphic that you see towards the right, the Good Housekeeping magazine, it's spreading like all of this advice through women and it's creating some sort of community between them. So rather than just having that collection of text, they started including more photographs and articles in it. In the 1900s is actually when photojournalism started becoming more popular through magazines. So then it goes a little bit to the 2000s where magazines are adapted to a digital platform. You see actual like photographs of people rather than just drawings of them. And they have more specialized topics like technology, fashion, and health. And it included more of the advertising brands, considering that advertising had an extreme amount of boom um, just a little bit before that in the 1980s, 1990s, and into the 2000s. So they started including more of the different brands on it. And that kind of created that partnership between having all of these magazines and being able to produce more frequently, like weekly or sometimes even daily. And you have all of these brands who are like, I will fund this magazine if you let me have a spot in it. So, what we think of what's going to happen with the future of magazines is because more people are switching to more of a digital platform rather than the print, we think that there's going to be more digital magazines that's going to be produced. On the left, you see that there's Entertainment Weekly, and they had this digital cover, which ended up becoming popular throughout society. It's not shown here because this is a presentation, but this was like this, it was a video. It was a video of like Zendaya and Timothy Chalamet who were like circling each other, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, they're so pretty and iconic and everything." Um, but it has more of like that video type. So, and that's possible through having those digital magazines. And also, since our society is starting to switch towards more of an environmentally conscious mindset, digital magazines is going to become more eco-friendly. So people who boycotted magazines because they were killing all the trees and everything, they're going to be more inapt to absorb that type of content. And we feel like there's some magazine companies that are gonna either have less print options or switch to only digital options. And so, with that, because we feel like it's going to switch a little bit more digitally, it's probably going to include more interactive material, like how it was with the Entertainment Weekly, is that there was movement because it was showing through an actual video. So it's straying a little bit away from kind of a static point of view and having what I put in quotations here, video magazines, where you can go through each page and see it kind of come alive. And I agree. I think it's called niche. So there's going
Hey,
to be more
not
niche
alone.
topics in it. Like with Vogue, they consider themselves more of like the high-end fashion. And there's going to be magazines that are going to be more of like the everyday fashion or mid-sized fashion or fashion for people for androgynous styles like that. So it's gonna become more like subsection-y and everything. And then this one is kind of like a hot take. There's going to be different ads for the same edition based off of demographics. If it does go more towards that digital magazine, maybe the viewer who like two different types of viewers who are seeing the same edition of a magazine are going to see different ads in it. So one person who like might be a male might be more inclined to see like male shaving products and stuff like that, while a female would look at female shaving products. So we think that might be possible with how the big data is collecting information on demographics. And of course, this is kind of an introduction, or the more AI is kind of more affecting all different kinds of media rather than just magazines. But we're definitely seeing a little bit more on how AI will be used in creating content and analyzing how the content is received to see if it's actually efficient in producing these magazines and getting it to the right audience. So, this doesn't entirely cover what's out on magazines, but we want to know what your guys' opinions are. So we've listed four different questions on here. Feel free to answer all four questions on it, or if you just want to answer the two, that is completely okay. But we want to know what is your favorite magazine ad and share it with us. We want to be able to see it. Number two, what makes a magazine ad effective for you? So thinking back to earlier in the presentation, did you like something simple with a lot of the images, or do you want something that has more text that you can read? Is engagement? Is it color palette? Is it layout? Stuff like that. Number three is how often do you look at magazines? As you can see, we don't really look at magazines, so we're kind of curious to see if anyone like is straight addicted to it. And number four, do you feel like magazines are losing their effectiveness in modern society? Why or why not? And that's what we have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching.
Thank you guys for listening.